Jeff Bezos has created an enormous amount of value. His revolution in retail alone has saved us untold hours of time and has added innumerable hours to each of our lives. He has also drawn on his own personal earnings to invest heavily in the space industry. Why then is it that so much of the response to his historic achievement in spaceflight is such a disgusting display of hatred, vitriol, and resentment? We will be analyzing this response to Bezos' spaceflight today. Welcome to New Idea Live, the podcast of the Ayn Rand Institute. I'm Agustina Vergara. I'm a research associate at ARI, and joining me today is Keith Lockitch, senior fellow and instructor at ARI. Welcome, Keith.
Hi, Agustina.
So, Keith, I wanted to start this podcast by letting you and the audience know how I personally felt when I watched the launch of the Blue Origin rocket back a week ago in July 20th. So I remember when I started watching it, as it happens with these things, I was kind of like optimistically nervous about it because like this is such a major conquest over nature. And of course, like all like space launches are this, but it's such a big deal to do this that I was kind of like nervous, something can go wrong. But at the same time, I had like full confidence that the research and the human ingenuity that went behind this project would make the launch successful ultimately. And they were showing in the live stream, like before everything started, like the parts of the rocket and the whole system that launches the rocket. And I was like in awe of this like incredible piece of machinery that is designed in this specific case to take non-expert people, meaning not professional astronauts, to space and back safely. And then, I saw Bezos and the rest of the crew led by Wally Funk, which I thought was really awesome, walking to the rocket. And I was kind of like trying to wrap my head around what it must feel like to be in their shoes. And it was just awesome. And then when it launched, I just felt like profound admiration at this achievement and joy kind of that I was witnessing what to me was like a milestone in space exploration. And the human mind is capable of such incredible things. And honestly, anyone that can achieve this level of mastery over nature has my admiration. I know this has happened many times before. Every time I see it, I can't help but, be amazed by it. So, and then they came back to Earth like safely, and then seeing how happy they were, and the cameras inside of the pod, and how they were like playing in space. I thought that was incredibly awesome. And then in the aftermath, before the launch, I had seen a lot of a few articles and a few tweets here and there, like hating on Bezos before the launch. But I thought, after seeing this, there's no way people are going to keep this up. But I was honestly kind of shocked to see the level of hatred and vitriol against Bezos and Blue Origin that after the launch.
Yeah.
It was just, I'm shocked, honestly.
Yeah, I had a similar reaction. I mean, I read a little bit about Bezos's goals in founding his space company, Blue Origin. And, like you, I was like thrilled to see him achieving this huge milestone and the excitement that went all around that. And then, yeah, I mean, I was disgusted at how viciously he was being attacked. And that's why we wanted to do this podcast, because I just think there's such a disconnect between his achievements and the way he's treated in the culture. And that's what we wanted to talk about. So, but let's just to set the context a little bit, what were some of the comments that you saw? Some of the some of the hateful tweets and things that you saw?
Yeah, so there was a lot of backlash from basically everyone in the public eye, and not just but regular people as well. And there was from the media, celebrities, politicians, etc. They for instance, there was this couple tweets from Tulsi Gabbard that were honestly, in my opinion, really, really disgusting. And the tweets read, "Bezos, please stay up there. Do the world a favor." And then another tweet from her. "The only problem I have with Bezos' Blue Origin space rocket ship into outer space is that it's going to come back." So
yeah, I mean that, yeah.
And then you have Robert Reich, who is quite a character, saying, billionaires rocketing off into space while the rest of humanity suffers is a sign of a broken society, not societal progress. So we're just like, we don't really want to give that much airtime to these haters and people who cannot see the significance of this achievement. But you just have to go to Twitter and like search Jeff Bezos to see what everyone is saying. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more. And there are many worse tweets that people are putting out there. And even, like SNL did a skit that I found terrible.
Yeah.
It's everywhere in the culture, unfortunately.
Yeah. So I mean, I think the place to start today is with the question of, why is there so much animosity towards Jeff Bezos in the first place? I mean, and we wanted to focus on him. There are other space entrepreneurs, Richard Branson, Elon Musk, et cetera. But I wanted to focus on Bezos in particular, partly because, I mean, it's not like the animosity towards him only began after the space flight. He's constantly vilified by people all over today's culture. And so why is that? And why, what are some of the reasons behind that? I think we can kind of unpack this in layers. I think part of the answer is, I really think that people take the achievements of someone like a Jeff Bezos for granted. And there's a disconnect between, we sort of forget what kind of an impact it's actually had on our lives. Like the fact that you can spend a few minutes on your phone ordering something from Amazon and be pretty confident that most of the time it's like literally going to arrive the next day. Like you haven't even had to get up from the couch. And like, this may seem like a little thing, but it's actually a mind-blowing business achievement. And the problem is it's become so commonplace that we forget what it was like when we didn't have this in our lives. And we take for granted what an enormous accomplishment it is that he was able to build a company that does this on the scale that it does this. And I think it's worth underscoring, like, why is this so valuable? We said this a little bit as part of the opening, but like the fact is, each of us only has one life to live. And every minute of that life is precious. If you add up the number of hours that being able to shop on Amazon has saved you, saved you from having to drive to 10 different stores and stand in checkout lines. Not that these are obviously this is like a first world kind of problem, right? But still, not having to do all that kind of thing has literally saved hours and hours from your life each year. I mean, Jeff Bezos has literally added years to each of our lives. And I think people don't think about that. They take it for granted. They forget the reality of that. That's part of it.
Yeah, and I lived most of my life in Argentina. I moved here to America only 4 years ago, and Amazon is not available in Argentina. You can technically order from Amazon, but because of regulations and customs and whatnot, you're not going to get your package anytime soon or at all. So I lived a lot of my life not having this awesome service. And then when I came here and I started ordering on Amazon, I was like, holy cow, like this is such a difference in my life. Like so much, I'm saving so much time just buying books for school instead of having to go to specialized library, law library, whatever, and buy it or rent the book. Like it's just, it added so much value to my life that I was just amazed. And sometimes you need that kind of contrast, to realize that and not take it for granted. But I don't think anyone should take it for granted. And it's not just, the delivery services, which is like you said, like it saved us an untold amount of time. But Amazon also offers many other services. Like it has like a lot of other companies within it that, much like the retail business, had added a lot of value to our lives. To name like just a few, there's Audible, which I personally use almost every day. It's a pioneer on audiobooks, and it allows you to be, quote, reading a book, like listening to a book while you do a bunch of other stuff. And there's, of course, like, the whole like Alexa system, which allows you to control many things in your house. without lifting a finger, just with and now it just spoke and she reacted. And it allows you to make online orders just by telling her, hey, order this from Amazon. And it's like literally having an assistant 24/7 inside your house. And well, there's so many other services that Amazon has that make our lives so much better.
I mean, the thing is that, and they keep adding value. I remember when they added Prime Video as something, they didn't increase the cost of Prime membership at the time. They just added all this streaming content. Just here, you get this as well as part of your membership. I was blown away by that. So if you really look at all the different ways that Amazon touches our lives, and Amazon Web Services, I mean, let's not get into that, which dominates the cloud computing industry. So many of the products that we use rely on AWS for their back-end systems. I mean, the company's had such an impact and has brought so much value into all of our lives. I think people, I really do think people take for granted and forget about all the ways in which they've been impacted by the company. And, I think another aspect that I think is important to highlight is the fact that this is a private company, that has made all these achievements through voluntary win-win trades. Amazon, unlike the government, Amazon doesn't have the power to force anybody to do anything. They have to earn their customers, they have to retain their employees, they have to work, earn the vendor relationships that they have through creating value and offering and trading in win-win relationships with everybody they deal with. I was curious because it hadn't occurred to me to look this number up before, but do you know how many Amazon Prime members there are in the world?
No, I assume many, but I have no idea how many.
Yeah, so I was curious. I hadn't looked this up before. Apparently, there's something like 200 million Amazon Prime subscribers, something like 150 million in the US alone, and 200 million worldwide. And that's like translates to something like $25 billion a year in revenues just from Prime memberships alone. And that's a drop in the bucket in terms of Amazon's annual revenues. So the point is, like, nobody's forcing 200 million people worldwide to pay for Amazon Prime. Obviously, they find it valuable enough, I'm one of them, to be worth paying more than $100 a year to have access to the services that being a member of Prime gives you. So you want to know why Amazon is one of the most successful companies around today and why Jeff Bezos, is one of the wealthiest people on the planet. It's because of the incredible value creation that causes, literally hundreds of millions of people around the world to partake in Amazon services. There's no mystery here. And what people need to recognize is what an incredible achievement this is. This is a heroic achievement to create a business that has this kind of impact on people's lives. There's a whole narrative in our culture about the idea that somehow the success of Amazon has come as a result of exploiting employees or taking advantage of tax loopholes or all this kind of thing. Again, I was curious because I didn't actually know what the number was, so I looked this up. I mean, do you know how many employees Amazon has worldwide?
How many?
There's something like 1.3 million people who work for Amazon. I mean, we work for a small nonprofit that has like 40 employees, and just even to manage a small group of people like that, like, it's very tricky and complex. Like the kind of leadership that is required to manage a company of 1.3 million people and to integrate all of their activities on the scale that Amazon does, such that they're able to, execute 2-day package delivery, like all the places that they touch. I mean, just the business achievement is mind blowing. And again, this is all through voluntary trades. Nobody's forced to work for Amazon. you hear all these claims and all these stories about, oh, how horrible the working conditions are at Amazon facilities. The thing is, when you see a culture-wide campaign that's aimed at attacking and vilifying any person or company who's successful on this scale, I think you need to be extra careful before accepting, just accepting point blank any claims about the supposed evil of that person or company. You know, I've talked to people who work for Amazon, and they talk about it being like an absolutely fantastic company to work for. If you have a workforce of 1.3 million people, are you going to be able to find some employees here and there who you know don't have a good perspective on their job and maybe have complaints about the working conditions? Sure, but you're also going to find, you know, millions of employees who love working there. So I think you have to be really skeptical about all these claims. And then the thing is that none of these claims explain Amazon's success. You don't achieve the kind of success and the value creation that Amazon had achieved by exploiting people. You do it by, you know, what we've just discussed, creating incredible value and delivering on that value every day. So, you know, I think people fail to appreciate just how hard it is to create a company that is so capable and so reliable on the scale that Amazon operates on. Again, I think the bottom line here is that people fail to appreciate what an achievement this is, and they completely take for granted the values that Amazon brings. So I think that's the first point that I wanted to talk about. But let's transition specifically to the attacks on the spaceflight event, because here, so there's the general animus against Jeff Bezos and Amazon in general, and I think a lot of that is a result of the things we've talked about. But with the spaceflight event in particular, it was like it brought a special focus, and I thought just the superficiality and the viciousness of people's comments were really striking, and their failure to kind of recognize and appreciate the true meaning of this event was evident. So let's talk about that. What were some of the things that you saw in terms of people's commentary on the spaceflight event itself?
Yeah, like the level of the level of the comments was just so low. I honestly could not believe what I was seeing from. I mean, there's some intellectuals, whatever that you expect, you know, that they are wrong, and they usually get everything wrong. But just the common people, general people, just making these jokes and mocking Bezos and Amazon, and just the level of the discourse was just so low that honestly I'm just shocked and just incredibly disgusted by this. But anyway, one of the major themes that I noticed was the idea that this was just, you know, a billionaire who can do whatever he wants, wasting money on a frivolous, you know, joyride. And I don't think that's the case, but can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, or so somebody called it a zero gravity roller coaster, or even worse. I mean, they use one of the kind of disgusting comments is the idea that this is some sort of midlife crisis. You know, I think this view represents a total lack of vision on the part of the people who say this. The fact is that Bezos has a very definite and very clearly articulated purpose behind his investment in the space industry. He gave a speech in 2019 at one of the Blue Origin events. You can look it up on YouTube. The title of the YouTube video is "Going to Space to Benefit Earth." It's transcribed as a talk, which you can get in this book. We should have put this up on there. This is a collection of his writings. It's the talk is called "The Purpose of Going into Space." So he literally has a whole article where he talks about what his purpose is in doing that. He spells out very clearly what his goals are. And I really encourage people to read the transcript of this talk, because it really shows you how the mind of an entrepreneurial genius functions. So what I took from his speech is the idea that in his view, it's achievable within a few generations that mankind can expand out into the solar system and start to live and work in space. And this isn't just, in his mind, this isn't like a science fiction fantasy for someday. The question that he asks himself is, okay, what is it going to take to actually make this happen, right? So he draws on the work of a Princeton physics professor who in the 1970s, did a lot of groundbreaking work on like what space colonization could actually look like in a realistic way and what it would require. And one of the things that Bezos stresses is like the first thing that's required is what he calls infrastructure. So in order to build space colonies and mine resources from asteroids and all this sort of thing, the first thing you have to be able to do is get people and stuff into space and back to Earth in a safe, reliable, and inexpensive way. So all the research and development that Blue Origin is doing is devoted to solving these problems: cost, safety, reliability. So Bezos talks about, he puts it as he's trying to build a road to space. And his goal with this company is to invest heavily in developing, the technology and the capability of making travel into space as commonplace as, air travel is for us today, flying on airplanes. And I mean, this is what he's been focused on since he founded Blue Origin more than 20 years ago. So this event last week, this was the milestone that this represents. It was the first human flight to space on Blue Origin's reusable New Shepard rocket system. This is the rocket system that they've been developing to achieve this goal of a reusable, to bring the costs down. So this was a huge milestone in the development, the progress toward this goal that he's been working on for decades. This was like the opposite of some sort of frivolous joyride. This is a major step forward in a very serious long range venture that he's been engaged in.
Yeah, and a few days ago, I came across an excerpt from an interview with Bezos from 20 years ago, or a little bit more than 20 years ago, where he talked about his dream of going to space one day. And in the interview, he was asked, like, what would you do if money was no object? If you had all the money in the world and you could do something? And he responded, like more than 20 years ago, that he wanted to explore space. And he acknowledged that it was a very technically difficult and hard thing to do, but that he was optimistic that, in the future, and he actually said, like in maybe 20 years, there will be enough technological advancement to make that possible for him to go to space and start space exploration by civilians. And then, well, as you know, like then later on in life, he went ahead and founded his own company. He built the Blue Origin, and he invested heavily on this and made it possible for him to go to space. That, I think, is so admirable. He took it upon himself to do this, with his own funds and his own wealth, and he went ahead and did it. And this is just the start of this, it's just going to keep growing, in my opinion.
Yeah, so I mean, the idea that this is like a midlife crisis, I mean, that's such a disgusting smear. I mean, this is a man who's been thinking deeply about this and planning for 2 decades and investing his own personal wealth that he's earned through voluntary exchange, we just discussed. Like, this is something he's been doing for 2 decades. And I think, so the people's failure to appreciate sort of the general goal and his general purpose led to even more kind of like some of the mockery and the attacks that you hear, I think, fall out of that as well. So what were some of the other, not to dwell too much on this, but what were some of the other smears that we've been hearing? Yeah,
so there was this other one mocking him that he didn't really, quote, go into space, that he went just above the Kármán line for a few minutes and that's it. It's no big deal. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, so again, I mean, this ignores the fact that he has a carefully thought out long range strategy behind this. So again, what I took from his speech is like his company is developing two kinds of rockets. So there's the New Shepard and the New Glenn system. And the New Shepard system, which is the one that flew last week, this is designed specifically for suborbital payloads, whereas the New Glenn system that he's developing is intended to launch things into orbit. And he has a reason why there's value in developing specifically a vehicle for suborbital launches. Part of the reason is they need to develop the skill and the technology to bring about this radical reduction in launch costs. But also, there's value in being able to launch things inexpensively just across the boundary of space. He has a lot of interesting things to say about this in the article. I don't want to spend too much time on it now, but to be able to safely, reliably, and inexpensively launch things just across, into a suborbital, take these suborbital payloads into space, you have to do it a lot. So he makes a comparison to, it's like a surgeon doing an operation. You want that surgeon doing the same operation 5 times a week, not once or twice a year. So part of the goal is to make this a regular thing and to develop the skill and the technology by doing it all the time, to bring down the costs, to develop the experience and the technology and the capability, and bring down the costs enormously of doing this safely and reliably. So the fact that this particular rocket system only goes up, to just above this Kármán line, this boundary of space, like that's by design. That's the whole point. And if you understand what his long range goal is, you understand that this is a step towards a longer strategy. And so people are all just dismissive of it because they don't understand, like, what is his goal? What is the long range purpose? What is he trying to accomplish here?
Yeah, and then another claim that I've heard or read related to trying to dismiss this achievement is he's not a real astronaut, people says, because he didn't actually do anything at all to pilot the ship. I think that is just absurd, but tell me what you think.
Well, I mean, it is absurd because part of it is that's the whole point of what he's trying to do here. I mean, he's part of what his company is doing is developing the technology to make the transition from astronauts piloting themselves into like highly trained people with experience as military test pilots and all this kind of thing, being the ones going into space, to a more of a passenger model. I mean, none of us, when we fly on airplanes, none of us are in the cockpit. We're just passengers, right? And there has to be a transition. I mean, if you look at the early days of aviation, I mean, it was the same kind of thing. It was highly risky, and there were highly trained people who took it upon themselves to pilot themselves in airplanes. The Charles Lindberghs and Amelia Earharts of the world, right? But today, we can all hop on a plane. We don't need to know anything about aviation, right? So this is all by design, and the fact that he and the other three passengers on the ship didn't have to do anything is part of the achievement. It's not something to mock him for. It's part of the goal, and it's part of the development of what he's achieving here. He describes in his talk, he describes the New Shepard system as specifically, it's a suborbital vehicle designed for space tourism, right? So again, this is part of his business model. It's if you can sell tickets to paying customers, that's a way of generating revenues that he can use to fund the continued research and development and bringing the cost down and that sort of thing. So all of this is by design.
Yeah, and related to that, there's this other claim that says that there is something, morally wrong about billionaires or millionaires to be able, with them being able to pay for these trips to space.
Right. And this is so again, this is a failure to recognize the strategy and the business model. I mean, so the fact that this is a business that's sort of almost designed for the ultra wealthy, like, people are criticizing him for that. But again, this is the whole first adopter phenomenon, which is well known in all kinds of industries. Like, how do you achieve efficiencies and safety and reliability? So again, what he says is, well, you need to be making trips into space all the time. How are you going to pay for that? Like, it's expensive to do all of this development, right? Well, so if you can create a business model where you have, billionaires who pay for the luxury of taking and the experience of taking these kinds of trips into space, and this is part of a long-range business strategy to make space travel, as commonplace as air travel is today. Like, again, this is all by design, and this is how you get to a place where it can be as commonplace and you can bring the costs down and make, maybe someday all of us can afford to do this as well. But that's not, I mean, the whole first adopter phenomenon is it's very well known in all kinds of industries that the first products are super expensive. They're considered as sort of luxuries for the wealthy, but then the revenues that are generated by selling these things at a high profit margin is what funds the ability for to eventually bring the costs down and make it ubiquitous for other people.
Yes, and this is kind of like, this is basically what happened with air travel, which is one kind of like the thing that we can compare the most. Back in the 1950s, air travel was prohibitively expensive for most Americans, and planes were almost twice as slower. And delays or cancellations were much more common than they are today because, planes couldn't weather certain climatic conditions. And then in the 70s, only 1/4 of Americans were flying at least once per year. But today, 9 in 10 Americans have taken a commercial flight at least once in their lifetime. So a business that started off as, for the wealthy or the rich, ended up benefiting everyone else because it became so much more affordable as the industry progressed and advanced. And today prices are much more affordable and technology is much better than it was a few decades ago. And almost any of us can hop on a plane anytime we want. And I think the same is likely, like you were saying, like to happen with space travel. There will come a day, I think, when these flights will be affordable for many of us. And even if this doesn't happen in the short term, the technology that these people are investing on and developing for these flights might end up benefiting us all in the future too. Just imagine how much of the NASA technology we use almost like in our daily life, and that has benefited life here on Earth. Like, for instance, from air pollution detectors to some materials that are used in hip replacement surgery. So there's a lot there's a lot of benefits that will come from this, both like making space travel potentially available to us all at some point, but also from the technology that these people are investing on and researching. So I think we should
so let's just to sum this point up. I mean, to me, what this Blue Origin event represents is, so it's a major milestone in a larger business strategy to build the infrastructure for safe, reliable, regular space travel. And I think people who've been commenting on this haven't even bothered to even ask the question, like, why is he doing this? And what is his purpose in doing this? But this is why I view this as an absolutely heroic achievement. You kind of described it earlier as like making history. And I think it is in a very specific way. It's a historical milestone in the development of the private commercial space industry. So okay, let's take stock of where we are. We're halfway through the podcast here. So we're trying to understand, why is there so much hatred directed toward Jeff Bezos? And I think we've talked about two factors that are relevant. So one is that people take his achievements for granted. They fail to recognize just how much value he's created and how much better he's made people's lives through his work and through his business. Second, I think it's because they lack vision. They don't understand. They don't even bother to try to understand what his goals are and what he's trying to accomplish in the space industry. So I think these two factors explain some of the reaction that we've seen, but I don't think they explain it all, because I think there are much deeper, much more fundamental issues at work here. So what are, and we've talked about this a little bit, but why don't you talk about some of the more fundamental philosophical issues that you see as being relevant here?
Yes, I think that part of the vitriol and hatred that we see is because of basically the philosophy of altruism permeating people's thinking. And this relates to what we were discussing earlier about people thinking that there is something morally abhorrent about, billionaires having all this money to spend on space flight, And you see a critic like Robert Rice that says that billionaires going to space, quote, while the rest of humanity suffers, unquote, is a sign of, quote, a broken society. And I've seen this same kind of angle in other pieces, including a piece that was published in the Atlantic. So what these people are really saying is that, in my opinion, is that no one can enjoy the fruits of their labor and their wealth as long as other people on Earth are, quote, suffering. Like, it's unethical, to be happy if others are suffering. And they assume that, billionaires have a responsibility to fix the world's problems, to pitch in, like Elizabeth Warren said, they should pitch in to make everyone better off. And that's what they think. And also, I want to say something. I don't want to concede that premise that the rest of humanity suffers while these billionaires are going to space. Yeah. That is just simply not true.
I wanted to jump in.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to jump in on that point as well, because the perspective that people try to have on the world is this idea that somehow, that the humanity is in a terrible state. We're all suffering and dying. This is a broader theme that relates to some of the people who write about what you could call progress studies, like the Steven Pinkers and people who point out the fact that if you look at the data, about in all kinds of measures of human life and well-being, we're living at the time when life on Earth has literally never been better for people. It's the progress in life expectancy and income and the rates of violence declining, and just like if you look at a book like Steven Pinker's Enlightenment Now, it is packed with data showing how much progress we've made as a result of the Enlightenment values of reason, science, technology, and this sort of thing. So first, the whole perspective that people bring to this, like, oh, we're all suffering and dying on Earth and Bezos is flying off to space. Well, no, we're not all suffering and dying on Earth. Obviously, there's still, it's true that poverty and hunger and these kind of things do still exist in the world. But the solution to them is exactly the kind of entrepreneurial wealth creation that Jeff Bezos embodies, not attacking him and stealing all of his money to tax him to the hilt in order to allegedly address these problems.
Yeah, but this is exactly what this altruistic perspective does, right? These people that want others to sacrifice their very last penny to help, stem world like suffering, whatever that means, which we've said like it's not as they painted. And when it comes to these billionaires and millionaires, these people think. These critics think that nothing they earn can be spent on themselves. As long as someone else needs it, they must give it away, because how dare you keep your wealth to yourself? And Ayn Rand obviously talked extensively about altruism in most of her works, and she was a critic of altruism. Obviously, we don't have time to explain her whole perspective. But there's this quote that I think is fitting for what we have been seeing in these critics, in this angle of criticism against Bezos and other billionaires. She says that the basic principle of altruism is that man has no right to exist for his own sake. The service to others is the only justification of his existence, and that self-sacrifice is his highest moral duty, virtue, and value. There's a lot to unpack on that quote, but again, we don't have that much time. But I would ask the audience to think, like, this is whether like they actually see this happening with these critics. What this is actually what the critics for the Bezos critics are trying to tell us, that service to others is what these billionaires like Bezos have to do, and they have to give away their fortune as long as there's one single person on earth suffering, whatever that means. And another thing is that I think one question one should ask oneself when confronted by the claim that billionaires should spend their money funding, like paying for student loans, like Elizabeth Warren asked for funding certain programs or whatever, is why should they? Why do other people have a claim against these people's money and the fortune they made? And why is there a moral obligation for the Bezos of the world to do this? And I think this is probably what altruism thinking does. They just default to they have to give it away, they have to help because people need it, so therefore that need is a claim on their fortune somehow, and it just corrupts the thinking about this type of issue. And I mean, honestly, I don't think these people would stop until millionaires or the Bezos of the world would end up with nothing, pretty much.
Yeah, I think that ties in with the point that we were making earlier, that people fail to appreciate the ways in which an entrepreneur like Bezos already brings value to people. I mean, you were talking about as a student just ordering your textbooks, like his business innovations have added value and made it easier for you to live and study and all this sort of thing. That's the value that he brings to the world. That's the kind of quote help that he gives to people. It's a voluntary win-win trade. It's not it doesn't require any form of sacrifice, but it's sacrifice that our culture upholds as the essence of morality. So if somebody's profiting by engaging in win-win trades, they get no moral credit for that. They only get moral credit if they give up values and sacrifice.
Yeah, and like you said, I think Bezos has already made the world so much better with everything we've mentioned, from the services and the job creations, everything. I mean, honestly, what more do these people want? It's just, I don't know. I just get really mad with this type of thing. But if we look back in history a little bit, this animosity against successful business people and entrepreneurs is really not new. So some of the productive genius of our era, including Bezos, are being attacked in similar ways that previous generations of productive innovators were, like John D. Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan, and the so-called quote robber barons from the 19th century. So this is not a new phenomenon.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a major theme of Ayn Rand's writings. I mean, the novel Atlas Shrugged, in certain ways, all about the question of why is it that the productive wealth creators, like this is her metaphor of the atlases who carry the world on their shoulders. Why are they met with hatred and vilification when they should be respected, admired, and met with gratitude for the value that they've created and the improvement they've brought to everybody's lives? So this is, it's a major theme of her work. One talk I wanted to highlight in particular is she has a speech called America's Persecuted Minority, Big Business, when she sort of develops this point further. And she talks specifically about how politicians try to use business leaders as scapegoats for all the economic and societal problems that are actually caused by government interventions into the economy. So people have a vested interest in trying to blame all the world's problems on capitalism and on successful business leaders in order to create a scapegoat and to create a set of people that they can point to and say, well, all the problems are caused by them, and what you need to do is to give us more power so that we can deal with those SOBs and solve the problems. But it's a rationalization for a real hatred of the kind of achievements and the kind of success that these people have created.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is, from my perspective, this is there's an element of envy here, or more specifically what Ayn Rand called, the phenomenon that Ayn Rand called the hatred for the good for being the good. And she talks about this extensively in her essay, The Age of Envy. And she says that this is hatred that is not resentment, she says, against some prescribed view of the good with which one does not agree. It is, as she says, hatred of the good for being the good means hatred of that which one regards as good by one's own conscious or subconscious judgment. It means hatred of a person for possessing a value or virtue one regards as desirable. And I think this is an instance of that, because, you know, Bezos and other millionaires are resented by a lot of people, but for different reasons. But what we have been seeing in this particular instance of Jeff Bezos' spaceflight is that he's been like put down and completely ridiculed for actually his best qualities, not even his worst qualities. He's been criticized for funding his own flight to space and for having the vision and courage to pursue that. And something he's been dreaming for at least 20 years that we know of. 20 years, probably been dreaming about it since he was a kid. I would venture, I mean, that's probably true. And, you know, and he opened the door to space exploration by private companies, you know, and that's something that, like we have said before in this podcast, like something that we will all benefit from in the future. So I think that's part of what's going on in the response in the culture. And I think it's just really disgusting and sad. And I fear for what's going to happen next, honestly.
Yeah. So we're just to wrap up, we should take some questions soon. But I think just to kind of summarize the basic point here, I think at the most basic level, I think what we're seeing here is one of the most ugly features of our cultures today. Attacks on a creative, successful producer, someone who's created an enormous amount of wealth and brought an enormous amount of value into being, impacting all of our lives for the better, and he's being attacked because of his virtues. I think it's people really need to ask themselves, like, what does it say about a person's soul if your reaction to, you know, the sight of somebody going to space on his own dime after founding a company dedicated to space research, you know, and based on a fortune that he's earned through incredible value creation, is not admiration and respect, but resentment and vitriol and mockery and hatred. I think people really need to take a hard look at themselves and ask, what does that say about themselves? You know, I think you can have two basic orientations in life. You can be driven by values and value creation, or you can be driven by resentment and this phenomenon of hatred of the good for being the good. And unfortunately, I agree. What we're seeing across the culture is so much of that latter disgusting emotion. So on that happy note, let's draw a line, and why don't we take a look at some of the questions that have been coming in. We've been getting questions on YouTube. Yes. We've been getting questions on first of all, I just want to thank all the people for their super chat donations. We've gotten quite a few number of those. I just want to echo one of the comments from one of our super chat people who says, I don't care about the masses. If Bezos wants to fly to space, it's his money and his business. Screw the mob. So I agree with that completely in sentiment. So,
yes.
Yeah.
So here's, I think what it would be a good question to take now. It comes from Zoom, and it says, when it comes to justly evaluating ultra successful producers, how do you weigh serious moral shortcomings? This is broader than Bezos, of course, this person says.
Yeah. I mean, the way I would approach a question like that is to ask sort of, what are the aspects of their character that they are conventional and, you know, are expressions of the sort of dominant ideas that exist in our culture. So if somebody expresses sort of altruistic views, you know, so does everybody else in the culture. So the way I approach it is to ask the question of, like, what is distinctive and unique about this person's character and achievements, and what aspects of his character and achievements are just conventional things that he shares with everybody else on the planet. So in the case of Jeff Bezos, I mean, yes, obviously I don't agree with all of his views. I don't agree with all of his philanthropy. I don't agree with, a lot. But in all those areas of disagreement, I mean, it's an expression of the ideas that are dominant in the culture and that he shares with basically everybody else. So I don't, it's not reasonable to sort of single him out for criticism for those things that he shares with everybody else who also holds those views. But is that what's essential and what's distinctive about Jeff Bezos? I would say no. What's distinctive about him is his achievements and the thoughtfulness and the genius that he brings to those achievements. And so I think that it's a matter of focusing on what's essential, and part of the way you get to that is by asking what's distinctive and unique about this person. Did you want to add to that, Agustina?
No, I don't have much to add to that. I absolutely agree with everything you said. So let's see what else we have here.
Well, there's a question: how much did Amazon benefit from government lockdowns? I don't want to read between the lines here, but if there's an extent to which this question is saying, the part of the reason Amazon was so successful is because the government did these lockdowns, that explains the success. Again, it's like I have a totally opposite perspective. We were all victimized by these government lockdowns and by the totally mangled approach that the government took to the whole pandemic. So all of us were victimized by that. We're all locked up in our homes. And who came to our rescue? I mean, I view Amazon as an absolute savior. So many people were able to get the products that they needed while they're locked up in their homes because Amazon was able to rise to the occasion, expand its delivery service, expand its consumer base, its customer base. I mean, again, it's one of these things, like some of these things that we said about the space travel stuff. People just have this topsy-turvy perspective on it that's so bizarre. Like I view Amazon as kind of heroic in how it helped people through the pandemic. So the idea that this is somehow, they just benefited from this government action, I just think that's totally the wrong perspective to have on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that 100%. I don't know what our country would have looked like. I mean, our lives would have looked like without Amazon during the pandemic specifically. And it wasn't just, they also implemented a bunch of measures, much like every business, to protect their own employees as well. So it's not like they didn't care about that. They kept people employed, and there were a lot of layoffs in the country when the lockdown started, kept people employed, and they implemented new unprecedented measures to protect those employees that were still working.
Yeah, I don't remember the number, but sorry to cut you off. I looked this up as well because there was some incredible number of people that Amazon hired who'd been laid off by other companies because of the pandemic, but they were able to find employment with Amazon because Amazon was ramping up its operations. So, this is a really positive thing. Yeah. So there's another question here that came from YouTube. Didn't DARPA and government bailouts create Amazon, not Bezos? I mean, again, this is so. Yes, Jeff Bezos didn't create the internet, obviously, right? Nor did he create, UPS or the mail services that he relies on. He didn't create this is an interesting point because it's something that he talks about in this talk that I mentioned earlier, the purpose of going into space. He talks about the fact that when he started Amazon, he was building a company, on the basis of certain infrastructure that had been built over over decades and even centuries before him. So, the infrastructure for transportation and delivery of things, the whole financial infrastructure of credit card payments. I mean, you could put, like, Amazon didn't have to create that. That already existed, and you put your credit card on Amazon and you can buy stuff. The whole development of the internet, obviously, Amazon was resting on that. But, and just as a quick side digression here, this is part of what's so interesting about what he's trying to do with space, because he recognizes that for the entrepreneurs of the future to build the space colonies and to build the asteroid mines and to extract resources and to create, opportunities for travel and leisure and work and all this kind of thing in space, the first thing they need is infrastructure. So in the same way that he benefited from all these different pieces of infrastructure that he built upon in founding and developing Amazon, he's saying that none of that exists for space yet. We don't have the roads to space yet, but that's what he's trying to build. He wants to be one of the people who are creating the infrastructure that future entrepreneurs can build on. So that's the first point I wanted to make. So he has this perspective on what kind of infrastructure requirements were important in the development of Amazon, and how does that translate into what his goals are for space. But that's just a side issue. To answer the question, the fact that all that infrastructure exists is not what made Amazon. It's not what created Amazon. If you think that's the case, then why is it that Amazon became Amazon and not some other company? Why is Jeff Bezos the entrepreneur who has achieved the success and the scale that he's been able to achieve and not somebody else? There's a failure to recognize just how rare and how difficult it is to have the leadership and the just the business competence to create something on the scale that Bezos has. With regard to with regard to issues of taxation and government, we live in a mixed economy. I mean, we all of us suffer from that, and there are ways in which the government chooses winners and losers through its policies. None of that should exist, but you can't. I think attacking someone like Bezos because of the ways in which his company has had to work within the systems that exist. Again, there's no tax bailout that made Amazon what it is today. What made Amazon what it is today is the incredible, value creating efforts of Bezos in leading this, 1.3 million employee company. That's what made Amazon. And I don't think it's the only just way to look at that is that it's an incredibly heroic achievement in business. And I don't think there's anything more to say about that.
Yes.
Okay, I was hoping I wouldn't go into full rant mode there, but I just did. So.
Yeah, no, I get that, because I'm also kind of outraged at all this vitriol against him. But okay, we're at time almost. So I would like to thank everyone who made super chat donations. We really appreciate that. We got a lot of those today. And right after we finish this podcast, Keith and I will be on Clubhouse discussing more of the things that we discussed here today. And so we'll be on the Ayn Rand Club on Clubhouse. You can look it up. And now Clubhouse does not require invitations to sign up. So you just can go and sign up and immediately join the Ayn Rand Club and, participate in the discussion there. So some resources that we would like to highlight. One of them is, like what Keith mentioned earlier, America's Persecuted Minority, Big Business, an essay by Ayn Rand. You can find it online. Yes.
Yeah. And let me just jump in. So the second one that's listed here, Notes on the History of American Free Enterprise. We didn't actually end up talking about that. We could talk about it a little bit on Clubhouse if people join us there. But I put that in there because there's some interesting parallels Ayn Rand, it's an article where Ayn Rand talks about some of the history of the railroad systems in America in the 19th century. And there's some interesting parallels there with space. So I just thought that was interesting to link to.
Good. And then another essay that we mentioned was The Age of Envy, which you can find in the book Return of the Primitive. And you can find that, you can buy it on Amazon, obviously. And then another essay by Ayn Rand that is really illuminating is Apollo 11, which can be found in The Voice of Reason, another one of her books. And in the same book, you can find Epitaph for a Culture. And
yeah, can I just jump in on that one too? Because because we didn't really talk about this, but this is, so Apollo 11 is Ayn Rand's like eyewitness account of the launch of Apollo 11 and her discussion of the sort of the philosophical significance of the moon landing and the space program and all that. And in Epitaph for a Culture, sort of as a follow-up article where she talks a lot about the cultural response to the moon landing. I think people would find that interesting looking at that today, because a lot of the attacks that people are making against Bezos, they were saying the same thing about the moon landing in 1969. So it's actually interesting to go back and see, that a lot of the negativity and the hate and the attacks, I mean, that existed back then as well in a totally different context. So interesting to look at that.
Yeah, it's one of the other one instance of what we said earlier. Like, these attacks are really not new, in general. But and then Ayn Rand has a radio interview that is available on the Ayn Rand University app and ARI campus called "The Robber Barons," which is really illuminating about the attacks that the robber barons from the 19th century had to face from the culture, which are sadly very similar to what our productive geniuses of today have to go through. So next week's episode of New Idea Live is going to be titled "The Pure Hatred of the New Antitrust Push," which is kind of related to what we have been talking about today. It's going to happen next Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, and Onkar, Gate, and Ben Bayer are going to be discussing. So finally, how to follow us. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel and click the bell to get notifications when we go live or upload new content. And please also like, share, and comment on this video to help attract attention to our channel. And likewise, if you're watching on Facebook, please like and share this video. And if you have questions or comments, please email them to us. We always read and very often answer your questions that you send. And sometimes we take your suggestions for episode topics. And you can email us at newideal@aynrand.org. So with that said, thank you to the audience for being here today. Thank you, Keith. And well, we'll see you hopefully in Clubhouse, everyone.
Okay.
Okay.